Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm delighted to have Jacque Gorelick with us. She is the author of Map of the Heart, and we're going to get all into it. But first, a little bit about Jacque. She's a writer and former educator whose work explores the complexities of family, identity, and belonging. Her essays appear in the New York Times, Salon, Newsweek, the Washington Post, HuffPost, the Kenyon Review, Los Angeles Review of Books, Pithead Chapel, and other publications. And this is her debut memoir by Vine Leaves Press, and it tells the story of hard-won family life upended by a medical emergency. She lives in California with her husband, 2 boys, and a melange of rescues. And you can find out more about her at jacquegorelick.com. Welcome.
Thank you, Estelle. I'm so excited to be here.
So can you start with a little capsule version of what happens in the book?
The inciting incident of the book is the morning that my husband and I felt we had gotten the groove of parenting enough. We had a new baby. He was 9 weeks old, that we could actually embark on an outing. So not just a stroll around the neighborhood, but an actual hike. And my husband wanted to get a run in. You know, we were new parents. We hadn't been exercising as per usual. And it was a gorgeous day in February. So we went out to a trail. He ran ahead while I pushed the stroller behind. And as he looped back to wave at us and peek into the stroller and see our son, he stopped abruptly about 20 feet ahead of me and just leaned forward a bit, and I could tell something was off. And so he collapsed, his heart stopped beating, and that's what resulted in him being admitted to the ICU in a comatose state. And then they kept him in one to try to preserve his organs and his brain and hope that he would be able to come out of it. So that's kind of how the story opens. But the story that's braided throughout the 10 days in the hospital, which is framework for the medical story, is my background of growing up with a very rootless and disjointed childhood, which was filled with the initial divorce of my parents when I was very young, then a new marriage and wanting that mother to be my mother, and trauma bonding with her throughout a difficult marriage with my father, who was a difficult man. Then when my mother died, it just sent us, my brother and I both, into more rootless childhood. Eventually, I became estranged from all biological family. And so this experience of becoming a new mother, getting married, having my new baby, I felt hopeful that I was going to get to create the stability that I had so wanted as a girl growing up. And so when the medical emergency happened with my husband, and I didn't know what the outcome would be, and I was told to get my affairs in order, it wasn't looking good, it almost organically brought about all of this reflection that wove itself through the real-time, fast-paced medical emergency, because I was there thinking, how could this be happening again? I'm going to lose it all again. And at the same time, there was this really visible juxtaposition between my husband's family coming and showing up and this real visible reminder that I didn't have a traditional family to show up for me. But what I did have were very good friends that I had made throughout the years, and they showed up in, just very, very powerful and devoted ways for me while I was in the hospital to help care for my son and help me toggle back and forth. So that's how those two threads of the reflection and the real-time medical emergency.
And you need both. I mean, you have the compelling scenes, especially starting out in the beginning, the inciting incident. This is happening. And firefighter Steve is the one who comes and steps up and tells you what to do to, help your husband, which is just amazing because you talk about later in the book that very few people managed to survive that emergency that happened. And it's so interesting to me because your mother, well, you call her your mother because you even refer to having married her in a ceremony when you were 6, when your dad was with her. She does come to the hospital. And so that gives you the opportunity to deal in that present day with her, but also talk about what had transpired. There isn't a lot written about family estrangement in that way. And I wonder if you had a harder time writing about the estrangement than about the medical situation and the day to day.
That's interesting. They were challenging in different ways. I absolutely did have a hard time writing about both of them. I think that the medical emergency, I had never written about it. I hadn't been a writer. I came to writing after, a career of elementary education. I was a teacher. And so when I wrote about it, it was reliving it, and there was a traumatic element to it where it was a real visceral traumatic response. Writing about the estrangement, I already knew that it was going to be hard, and I knew all of the emotions that it was holding for me. And so I think I was able to prepare for that part more than when I wrote the medical. I didn't expect it to be so visceral and so scary all over again. I mean, not all of it, but the real, critical moments, it was really hard to write. But yes, they were both re-traumatizing in different ways, I would say.
And when I first started reading it, I thought, oh God, I hope he doesn't die, because then it's a different kind of book. And so you had me involved with the day to day, what was happening with him, what was happening with you when he was induced in a coma and all that. And then when the family came in, it was quite obvious that there is a distance between you and probably your way of being in the world and his family and their way of being in the world. And it kind of reminded me, I'm not saying you're like her, but Bethany Frankel had a situation of estrangement with her family, but she had the same reaction in a weird way to her daughter's father's family because they were very smothering maybe, or they just came in and they enveloped. And if you've had the experience you've had, you probably need to maintain the distance of safety. And you even explore that a bit in your writing. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also, were there any repercussions with how you positioned them in the book?
So I think for people who've gone through childhoods with repeated grief and loss, and adults who did not adult the way they should have to keep the children protected and feeling safe, I think there is a tendency to become hyper independent and really self-sufficient. And in conjunction with that, obviously there's a protective need to create barriers. And so I think that I did that as a child. I mean, I know that I did. And I think as I got older, only with years of building trust and seeing things play out in different ways with relationships, does that start to kind of soften and fall away a bit. And so I think at the time that I met my husband's family, there were probably two things going on. I was coming to it from a place of really protecting. I mean, you hear about this mother wound if you have an early loss, and I think there is this almost unconscious, like you're not, it's not something I necessarily was so aware of, but there's a part of you that you protect. You grapple with like, okay, if how much do I give away of myself because then I'm not protecting this part of me that was lost. And so there's this balance. It's a subconscious thing. It's not deliberate, but I think there was that. And then I just think we had very different personalities and we were coming together from very different backgrounds and very different places. And I think there was just a lack of early conversations like you do back and forth getting to know each other, and then you get past a point where that seems like a natural progression. So we really never got to know each other very well. And knowing my husband and now after all these years, that's more of a personality trait. It wasn't specific to me, but I didn't know that at the time. So I thought, why aren't they trying to get to know me more? Not, oh, me, but I did ask a lot of questions and try to get to know them. And so there was a part of me that took it, oh, well, they just must not want to get to know me. And so I think I mentioned in the book, it was years and years that we were together before they even realized that I had a dad and he was in Alaska and I had a brother. And there were just these questions that were never asked. So I think you get to a place where then it's really hard to forge forward with that close relationship. But I think the expectation was that we would be close, but the work to build a close relationship hadn't happened. So there was this disconnect there.
You were like a cipher to them, like they didn't really know what to make of you, and yet they were coming in like a swarm. You were thinking, I want him to have peace and quiet and heal. And have they read the book? Have they said anything to you?
Yes, they have. And I think no one's had a negative reaction. I'm sure there are parts that maybe they remember differently. I mean, they have said this, but I would just assume because that's how memory works. But no, I mean, they've been supportive and yeah, no fallout from that, luckily.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
I obviously, and I think with everyone who writes memoir, I mean, the goal is not to write a slam piece and to have anybody to be as hard on yourself as you are on other people, which is why I think it's really important to own how that coming together was created from both sides, from my background and my personality and my makeup and theirs as well. So not just, oh, this is, pointing fingers.
I really like your title, Map of the Heart, because it's a metaphor as well as a tangible. So this is a heart issue. And so it is Map of the Heart. In fact, at the end, you even show the emergency report when he was brought into the hospital and everything that had happened. And yet it's also memoirs about you, so it's your heart and how your relationship with him evolved and how you dealt with all the people in your life, either opening to them or closing to them or having experiences. So how did you decide to use this as the metaphor, like the title? Did it just come to you? Did it evolve from something?
So it didn't have this title to begin with, actually. But when I wrote, there's a chapter called Map of a Heart in the book. And when I wrote that chapter, I really felt that that was the heart of the book. And I think from then that became the title. Yeah. So I didn't set out with it that way. I didn't even set out with that chapter in mind. I mean, this was my first book. And so I had an idea from a big picture lens of how it began and how it ended and how I would try to weave the stories together. But I didn't have it super planned out in terms of knowing that would be a chapter in the book. So once I wrote that chapter, I thought, oh, this is the heart of the book. This is the name of the book.
So your narrative, it kind of moves through time, right? It has that present day at the time structure of the medical incident and then the hospital and the visits and how you were navigating it. And you also braided in stories from childhood, from your background, from meeting your husband and your evolving relationship. What were the conscious choices between weaving in these different disparate elements?
So initially, I knew it needed to have both. So that was always the intention. For me, the experience of that hospital time was a flooding and reliving of this early loss. Also, I mean, my goodness, I had a 9-week old. I'm sure, hormonal and adjusting to being a motherless mother, not having gone through pregnancy without a mom and without a family, and just really grappling with, okay, what does this mean for my child and my future? And then having it ripped out from under me, it really was a flooding of this reliving of all these losses that I had tried to really stuff down and move away from and not adopt into myself because it made me feel damaged and broken that this part of me existed. And there really was reemergence of all of that and almost this radical acceptance for it, because I think seeing this happen to my husband woke me up to the fact that, hey, this wasn't my fault that these things happened when I was a child, just like it wasn't my fault that this happened today. Why am I holding one against myself and not the other? There was this almost integrating of selves that happened. So I knew that it had to happen in the book because that's how my real experience was in the hospital. And then the decision from a craft perspective to braid them came from a real gut feeling that I needed to do that. Once I had written it, I had a pretty solid draft, but I had them in alternating chapters and I just wasn't loving it. I didn't think they were communicating enough. They weren't relating enough. And so I had a developmental edit at that point and just said, I know this isn't working, but what should I do? And then that suggestion came from the developmental editor to braid them together. And that was what I had thought I should do. I thought it was going to be a big challenge. So maybe I was avoiding it a little bit as a new writer, but I thought, okay, back to this and let's cut it up and break it up. And literally, physically, for me, that helps sometimes and figure out where everything goes.
So you had separate chapters. You had the present timeline, and then you would do a separate chapter about the past.
Yep.
And to you, it was kind of disjointed. It didn't feel like it flowed. So the developmental editor suggested taking the pieces from those separate chapters and weaving them in to various other chapters where it made sense.
Yes.
And did you use a sentence to build into each time? Did you have some way that you structured it to weave it in?
So I would look for the natural relationship. There were these natural times when the reflection and the childhood memories and those scenes would blend in. Like there was this father in the waiting room with his two sons, and he was older than me at the time, probably younger than I am now, but he had his one tween and one teen, if I'm guessing, age son. And they were there because their mother was in the ICU and she was not doing well. And so he and I would talk occasionally. I mean, it was a pretty grim place to be, but people would have conversations, kind of the regulars that were waiting. And he really did remind me of this lack of a father that I had in my life, but then also this father being left to care for the kids when the mother is not there. And so that was a natural place to weave in some of the memories and scenes of my father. And when he was obviously very different circumstances and a different person and time, but he was left to kind of pick up the pieces when our mother died. So there were times when that made sense to do and to weave in those memories.
And what about when you were weaving in the memories of your stepmother, who you called mom?
Yeah. So those I felt I had to really weave in a lot of the backstory before because she does end up coming to the hospital. We hadn't spoken in 3 years when she came. We had a really almost too close, almost enmeshed relationship and then not. So it was this real close and then not close and then close and then not close. And that was really for years and years. And so overall, I think in many ways it was a really good relationship. But then there was this part of it where I felt, I don't know, I'm not going to say it came from her, but that I couldn't fully be who I was, including all of these parts of me that came from my beginnings and my family of origin if I was truly going to be hers. They didn't go together. And so there was a part of me that was not living as a whole identity in order to have that relationship work. And I think it was really unhealthy. And then I think part of the push and pull and back and forth was probably unresolved issues of that trauma bonding. Like I said from the very beginning, there are so many things that when a child, and I know this now as an adult, then when a child goes through those kinds of losses and those kinds of grief, I think if it's left unresolved and can really pop up again. So I think we had a very complicated but very loving relationship. And so I felt before she came to the hospital, and there was a lot of anxiety on my part around having her come, but I had a friend there who knew her, thought we really did think, Ed probably wasn't going to make it. It's hard to be in that situation and not fear that you're going to make a mistake. Who do you tell? Who do you not tell? You can't go back and do it again. So she really thought we should call her. So after 3 years, she showed up and we really left everything at the door and we really picked up. We had so much practice having a good relationship that we picked up there and we just continued with that.
What does your husband think about your writing about him, good, bad, ugly, in the book, including the dating and the way he made a decision early on about your relationship and how that evolved?
Yeah. I mean, I think all of those things are very out in the open in our relationship. We were young. I think it was easy to look at those decisions as a 23-year-old and think, "Oh, what a jerk." But looking back at it now, being the mom of a 19-year-old and a man, realizing that we were so young. I mean, and even before I had a son that old, I knew that. We were so young and those were reasonable decisions. But at the time, all it feels is that your heart is broken and it didn't go the way you wanted. But I think that break for us was a good break. It was probably the right thing for both of us. And so I think he's really self aware. I wrote it from the place in time where we were. And so I had to be true about how I felt then, which was that I was very hurt and very confused and led on. And he knows that. He knows that's how it felt. We don't live in that anymore. We've been together so long. I think that he felt okay about me writing about that because that was true at the time. And he was my first reader. He always was the person that I said, if there's anything you want me to change, anything at all. And we went back and forth always with every change I made and I didn't have him read it a million times. But when it felt right again to say, okay, I made enough changes, here are the scenes that you might want to read. We did that up until the end to just make sure, because of course that was the most important thing to me, that he was okay with all of it. And he's been really supportive. He loves it. He has his friends reading it.
I want to ask you to do a little reading for us, but before I do that, I just want to ask you, was it easier to do the reflection part or easier to write the scenes?
Oh boy, easier is a hard word because the one, I guess, is archival. The other was more recent, but I wrote it 10 years after the hospital. So it was still a bit archival. So I had medical records for the hospital. Obviously, when I was drafting, I just wrote the story for myself and then I went back and really checked everything. And so both of them required some excavating of the past that was painful, but it was also satisfying to go back and check it and say, yes, this checks out with my memory, or, oh, if not, let me dig a little deeper. Oh, wow. So going through all my mom's things in boxes, I don't do that very often, getting everything out, going on papers.com, sending away for birth certificates, death certificates, things I didn't have because we just moved so much. I didn't have a lot of that and I didn't have access. I don't know if one was easier than the other because the medical part was also re-traumatizing to write. And then the medical fact checking, I wanted to be really as accurate as possible. And so going through that jargon and the sheets that they keep right at the bed, I have copies of all of that, the timestamps and what they wrote and the medications and all of that. It was a little mind numbing, but it was also interesting. They were difficult in different ways. Emotionally, excavating the past of my childhood and my estrangement from my brother and my dad and that early mother loss, that was painful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not an easy thing to write memoir. It's really the excavating, the taking the memories and putting them into language in a way that's going to bring the reader along is just so important. And speaking of bringing the reader along, I was wondering if you could read from page 160. And this is not focused on the medical, it's focused another aspect of your journey.
Yes. So just for anyone who hasn't read it, I'll just give a little context. So
Sure.
the medical story is broken up by the timeline. So the chapters are by hours. And when I would go in to see my husband in the coma very early on, an ICU nurse had said perhaps it's better not to speak out loud to them. They had some research indicating that while the brain is resting, maybe it's best to be quiet. And I'm sure I could have done either, but that felt like a relief to me to just not have another job to do where I had to say the right thing. So I had these conversations with him in my head when I would go in there and hold his hand and have these one way, almost journalistic style conversations. And so those became epistolary chapters in the book. And I think there's 10 of them. So this is one of those.
Yeah, and you used letters or the conversations you had to frame the different sections. So that's really interesting.
So this one's Let It Burn. Dear Ed, you look exactly the same. I don't know what I expected, but maybe some indication that while we prepare for the possibility of you waking up, you're preparing inside yourself. Sometimes this feels like it's happening to someone else. My body goes through the required motions. Wife of husband in coma, new mother. My mind keeps placing us inside of memories from the past or inside of our future selves, running through the park with Elliot in spring sunshine in search of dandelions or four-leaf clovers. I want to tell you this, but you are nowhere to be found. When we broke up, I missed date nights and kissing and Sunday brunches at San Francisco sidewalk cafes. But mostly, I missed talking to you. The year we ended things, I felt certain we'd never speak again. So I went looking for evidence of us to make sure it really happened. I checked the usual places. I kept photos, handwritten notes, matchboxes, and other mementos of my 20s. Even after a year together, there wasn't much proof of us. You weren't a note leaver, and predating email, I found no paper trail of our courtship. In nearly 365 days, I only had 2 pictures of us together. One was from your friend's wedding, where you mostly ignored me, and I mostly drank tequila with the cute bartender who kept asking if I was sure I was there with you. You, who seemed uninterested in my whereabouts. That photo was not the way I wanted to remember us. The other picture was also from a wedding, but in the beginning, before you acted as though you were strapped to a ticking time bomb whenever someone uttered the word girlfriend or attempted to pin down your weekend plans. I was in a black and white dress with patent leather strappy sandals low enough to keep my height just below yours and allow for dancing. You wore a gray suit with pinstripes, your hair draped over your eyes, both of us showing off summer tans. Fuchsia bougainvillea wound along the arbor in the background, making us appear to be somewhere Mediterranean instead of Napa Valley. In this picture, we're wearing easy smiles and holding hands. That's the memory of us I want to keep. What you can't see in this photo is how unequivocal my love had become for you. When it didn't work out between us, the loss felt overwhelming, like I'd never crawl out from under it. But it wasn't all about you. The losses and grief I'd been dragging around my whole life were so heavy. My dad, my mom, my brother, my lack of shared DNA, of roots, of feeling tethered to anything enduring. Our breakup reminded me of the severed relationships that came before. When you walked out of my apartment on Valentine's Day, I was certain the life I imagined, the family I wanted, the future I saw in us left with you. Since watching you collapse on the trail, I am filled with the same paralyzing fear that the future I want with every fiber of my being will leave with you if you don't wake up. After we broke up, I unloaded the contents of the bedside cabinet you had placed your glasses and keys on so many times. One by one, I stacked up journals that told the story of my childhood, my adolescence, my life before I met you. I called Lainey and asked her to come over, then walked to 7-Eleven to buy a cheap bottle of wine. I started a fire in the legless black Weber where you and I spent the summers nursing beers and trading sleep for uninterrupted hours to talk and wonder and overlap as the coastal fog crept in and covered the world in a blanket of gray mist. Lainey and I sat on the old plastic chairs under the eucalyptus tree where we sat when I first told you I loved you. One by one, I threw my journals into the flames. I thought if I burned the written record of my past, the cancer that stole people I loved, the fishing boats that sailed off to Alaska, the evanescence of family, I could start over. I didn't want to be the girl who couldn't complete the branches of her family tree. I wanted to burn down all of it and wipe the slate clean. The covers did not catch immediately, stubbornly protecting all the living preserved inside of them. But once the pages ignited, faint lines folded onto themselves and came alive. Cursive loops lit up, dancing in the flickering waves, swelling and crashing over page after page of my life. Ashes and embers chose sides, floating into the air or settling onto the smoldering years that had come before. Are you sure you should be doing this? Lainey asked as I held a fistful of pages in my hand. I'm not sure, but I know I'm done with it. We stared at the fiery ocean inside my Weber. The pile of journals at my feet shrunk until I held in my hand the one with the black cat on the white stucco stairs somewhere in Greece, which I had not been to, but was somewhere I dreamed of visiting one day. Not long after we started dating, the journal caught my eye in the window of the used bookstore I loved on Fillmore Street. So because of Cleo, my black cat, and because of Hope, I bought and filled its pages with the year I fell in love with you. And even though that journal was probably the catalyst for me burning down my past, I couldn't let it go. I started to. I pulled out the first handful of pages and tossed them into the dying flames. But I immediately wanted to reach back into the embers and take them back. I didn't think I'd see you again, but I wanted to remember. So now the beginning is missing, when it was carefree and romantic and love-drunk intoxicating. I could never bring myself to look, but I'm sure I erased the best part of our story.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me to read that section because I do think there are places in the book where all the threads touch. And kind of like a braided essay, that's where the tension and that's where the real electricity of the story comes from. And so I think there are those times when the epistolary and the childhood backstory and the real-time medical come together, and those feel really alive to me as well.
If somebody is trying to write their story, what are some pieces of advice that you would give them to get started? Maybe they have journals, maybe they don't.
I would say go to the place in your mind, however that works for you, that you need to go to really let yourself have the time and space to re-feel the emotions that were part of that experience, because that's really how it will come out on the page, and that's how you can tap into how it felt. And so I think giving yourself the time and space to pour through photographs, watch old movies, listen to music, go visit, if it's possible, locations that bring it back, everything you can to get into that headspace, and taking the time and space to really get there and give yourself permission to jot things down, speak them into your notes app, put them on Post-its. It'll all come together when you're ready to pull all of that together and start drafting. Or even if you have piecemeal pieces of drafts, when you had these scenes come into your mind, write them down. And then when you go to write the draft, you have all of this mind experience and mind memory. And then, when you're writing something so emotionally charged or re-traumatizing, I would suggest always to take breaks, to do other things in your day that bring you joy, that give you that grounding, whatever that is, where your mind can be idle, but your body can be busy. So you can move through that and still have the project in your mind, but not have it totally consuming you. Because I think it's important to have both.
Absolutely. That's great advice. So, was your path to publication easy or difficult? How did that work?
So my path to publication was peppered with roadblocks. I started writing this in the fall of 2017. And then I would say by the end of 2020, I'd gone through a developmental edit. I'd done many drafts and I felt like I was getting pretty ready to query. And then the world shut down, and I had a first grader and a seventh grader. And so they both required, my seventh grader was more autonomous, but there was the whole emotional aspect of a middle schooler losing out on that experience. My young one needed a lot of academic support. And so it kind of came to a little bit of a halt, I'll be honest. And then I would say maybe 2021, I started to get some pockets in the day where my kids were still home, but where I could query here and there. And so I spent maybe 6 to 8 months querying. And then actually, the day that my kids went back to school, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so that gave me another year where I just had to be patient, trust the universe. I had to focus on my health. And so it really did take about a year to go through all of that, surgeries and treatment and all of that. And then I started querying again. And I think I got up to maybe 80 agents at that point. But I also had this real big reminder of tomorrow is not promised, as if life hadn't already reminded me of that enough. But I just thought, you know what? I really want to see this book in the world. I'm not sure the agent is the right direction for me. So I started looking at small presses, and I really admired Vine Leaves books. I'd read a couple, signed up to read ARCs just to see, and they were beautiful. And I loved the books, and then the covers were beautiful and it had a good reputation. So I really was hoping that they would feel mutually. And then I sent it to them and a couple other presses, and I heard back from them. And once I did that, I would say it was not hard. Like, I mean, hard is the wrong word. It wasn't, it went in the direction I hoped it would, but the lead up to that was quite lengthy.
Having your own medical situation, I mean, did that change your anxiety about it, or did that change your ambition about it? Did it change anything about you when you were then doing the next step?
I really wanted to shoot my shot and not be my own no a little more maybe than I had before that. So I think it did make me realize that with the time that we have to do with it what we can. And so I think in a way it did give me that. When that happened, I was so worried about survival, to be honest, that it was like, okay, the most important thing had really became quickly just this small unit of my family and getting to see my boys grow up. But then, yes, the goal and the desire for the book didn't go away, but maybe it shrunk a little bit during that time.
And so giving birth to a book is like giving birth to a child.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. Yeah.
Yes. This has been such a rich discussion. I've loved talking with you about Map of a Heart. It just was fascinating to me how it was put together and how much you were able to weave in an effortless way. And it made me feel that I was reading, they always say the best memoir reads like a novel. So I felt like I was engrossed in your story. I wanted to know the ending. And of course, you as the protagonist, I was invested in your continuous emotional journey and where you were going to end up at the end. So very fulfilling. And I thank you so much for coming and speaking to me today.
Oh my gosh, Estelle, thank you so much. That means so much to me. And I'm so glad.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.